Um, Something I want to say before anything else, and I'm saying it because I feel it, not because it opens a reading nicely, is that the people in this community carry more than they show. What I see in the comments, in the questions, in the quiet recognition people express when something lands for them is a level of emotional depth that doesn't always get honored in the ordinary run of daily life. You feel things precisely. You think about what you feel. You keep showing up to understand yourself better. That is not ordinary. I don't take it for granted, and I don't want you to either. Now, let's get into what is genuinely alive in Virgo's reading right now because something has broken open and I need to tell you about it. There's a particular phenomenon in deep ocean navigation called a rogue wave, not a storm, not a system that builds visibly on the horizon and gives you time to prepare. A rogue wave forms beneath the surface through the convergence of multiple swells moving in different directions, each one unremarkable on its own, each one too small to signal what's coming, until they meet at a single point and suddenly, without warning, produce something enormous, something that dwarfs everything around it. Something that arrives with a force entirely out of proportion to what the surface conditions suggested was possible. What is happening in this person right now is a rogue wave, not a mood, not a nostalgic phase that will subside by next week. Multiple things have been moving underneath the surface of their life, realizations accumulating quietly, a growing clarity about what they actually want versus what they've been settling for, an awareness that has been building in the dark for longer than either of you probably knows, and they have converged right now into something that is bigger and more directional and more urgent than anything that has preceded it. They are awake in a way they haven't been before. And what they are awake to is you. Let me go slowly through what this awakening actually consists of because I think the layers matter and I don't want to collapse them into something too simple. The first layer is clarity about what they lost, not a romantic idea of you, not a softened, nostalgia filtered version of who you are that's easier to want than the real thing. The actual you, the specific, complicated, precise, sometimes difficult, profoundly real version of you that they had access to and moved away from for whatever reasons felt sufficient at the time and have been living in the absence of ever since. There's something that happens to people when they've been away from something genuinely rare long enough to lose the habituation to it. When the quality of what they were in contact with is no longer masked by familiarity, they start to feel the contrast. They encounter other people, other connections, other versions of what they thought they were looking for, and they keep running into the same wall, the wall of comparison that they didn't intend to be making, that they'd prefer not to be making. That keeps happening anyway because the standard was set somewhere and it was set by you. That contrast has been doing its work, and what it has produced, what the accumulation of contrast and comparison and the quiet daily reality of absence has produced is not a vague longing. It's a specific, named, undeniable knowledge. The knowledge that what existed between you was not replaceable, not interchangeable with something easier or less complicated or more conveniently available. Not something they can reconstruct with someone else who is similar enough that the difference shouldn't matter. The difference matters. They know it now with a certainty they didn't have before. The second layer of this awakening is something more uncomfortable for them, and I want to name it because I think you deserve to understand the full picture. They've had to look at themselves, not in the convenient way, not the self-examination that stays at the level of I made a mistake or I could have done that differently, the kind that produces a clean narrative of error and correction without requiring anything deeper. What's been happening in them is more excavating than that, a going down into the structure, kind of looking at the reasons they made, the choices they made, at the fears that masqueraded as decisions, at the ways they prioritize their own comfort or their own avoidance or their own protection from vulnerability over something that was asking them to be bigger than they were ready to be. That kind of self-examination is not pleasant. I want to say that clearly because I think sometimes people hear about someone's awakening and imagine it as a beautiful, luminous experience, all soft light and gentle revelation. Sometimes it is. But this particular awakening has had some darkness in it, some genuine reckoning with things this person would have preferred not to see about themselves. Some sitting in the discomfort of knowing they were the cause of something painful for someone who didn't deserve to carry it, and not being able to route around that knowledge or soften it into something easier. They've been sitting in it fully, and what has come out the other side of that sitting, and this is the important part, is not paralysis. It's not guilt that becomes an end in itself. It's something more purposeful than that. Something that has the quality of commitment, of having seen what they needed to see and arrived at what needs to happen next. What needs to happen next is you, not as a resolution to their guilt. I want to be precise here because it matters enormously. This is not someone trying to feel better about themselves by making amends. The motivation is not self-absolution. What's driving this is something older and more primary than guilt. Something that was always there underneath the choices they made and that has finally, through everything that's happened, reached the surface unobstructed. They love you. That's the simple version, the version underneath all the layers. They love you and they didn't fight for it when they should have, and they are not willing to let that be the final chapter. I need to talk about what fighting for your love actually looks like because I think it's important to have a realistic picture rather than a cinematic one. It's probably not going to look like a grand gesture. I feel that worth saying plainly. Not because they don't feel something grand, they do. The wave I described is genuinely enormous, but because what they've learned, what this awakening has taught them, among other things, is that grand gestures are not actually what was missing. What was missing was consistency, presence, the willingness to show up not in a single dramatic moment, but over time, repeatedly, in the ordinary instances where love is either demonstrated or quietly withdrawn. What they are preparing to bring is not a performance. It's a sustained offering, the kind that doesn't peak and subside, but that continues past the point where it's easy, past the point where the momentum of the initial approach carries it into the territory where it becomes a choice made again and again and again. That's what fighting for someone's love actually is. Not a battle, a recommitment to showing up repeatedly with full awareness of what it costs and a willingness to pay the cost anyway. And I feel this lands with some clarity. When I look at what's moving in them, I feel that they understand this now in a way they didn't before. That the understanding is part of what the awakening produced. They are not coming back with the same toolkit they had before. They are coming back having done something real in themselves that changes how they're able to love. Not perfectly, not without the possibility of difficulty, but differently, from a deeper and more honest place. Hold on. Something is asking me to stay here a moment longer. There is a specific thing they want to say to you. Not the whole of it. I'm not going to try to put words in their mouth that belong to them and not to me, but the essence of it, the core of what is pressing to be expressed. And what I keep feeling when I try to locate it is something like, I see now what I couldn't see then. I understand now what I was doing, and I understand now what I want, and they are not in conflict anymore. I want to come back. I want to try differently. I want to show you that I'm capable of what this asks of me, because I believe now, in a way I didn't before, that I am. That's the shape of it. That's what's building in them toward you. I want to turn to you now, fully, because you've been holding something through this period and it deserves to be seen clearly. You haven't crumbled. I want to name that first before anything else, because it matters. Whatever happened, whatever the rupture was, whatever the absence has looked like, however long you've been carrying the weight of something unresolved, you have maintained yourself not by being unaffected, not by being above it or past it or fine in some performed way, by staying with it fully and still remaining fundamentally, recognizably yourself through the carrying of it. That's not a small accomplishment. Most people, when something breaks, either fall apart or harden. There's a third path that requires more, the path where you feel it completely and stay soft and stay open and don't let the pain become the architecture of your protection. You've been on that path. I can feel it in the texture of your reading. There's an openness still present in you that, honestly, not everyone would have maintained under the same circumstances. That openness is not a weakness. It is the thing this person is coming back for. It's the thing they couldn't find in its absence, in all the places they looked after leaving it. But I want to sit with something that's also present, because I think honesty requires it. You are allowed to have conditions. I know that sounds almost too simple to say, but I feel it needs to be said directly. The arrival of this person, the return, the fighting for, the awakening, none of that automatically means you owe a particular response. Love is not a debt to be repaid. The fact that they have done their work internally, that something genuine has shifted in them, that they are coming back more whole than they left, all of that is meaningful. All of that matters. But it does not override your right to know what you actually want, to take time with it, to require something specific and real before you open back up to what this represents. What do you need to see? Not what do you think you should need, not what would be gracious or generous to require. What do you actually need to feel safe enough to be fully present in this again? That question belongs to you. The answer is yours alone. And whatever it is legitimate. Something about the moon keeps pressing at the edge of this reading, and given that it's in the title, I want to honor what it's pointing toward rather than move past it. There's a quality to this moment that is genuinely lunar in its nature. The moon doesn't force things. It doesn't push. It exerts influence through something more subtle than force, through the slow, massive, reliable pull of its presence on things that are already in motion. Tides don't happen because the moon demands them. They happen because the moon is there in its fullness, and the water responds to what it cannot help but respond to. Something in you is the water in this reading, and something in them is experiencing the equivalent of a full moon rising, a fullness of awareness, a completeness of feeling, an illumination of things that were present all along, but that the light hadn't yet reached with sufficient clarity. Everything they feel about you, everything they understand now about what they want is lit up, fully visible to themselves in a way that can no longer be argued with or rationalized or navigated around. And the pull of that, the gravitational reality of a love that has been fully illuminated and acknowledged, is already reaching you. Maybe you can feel it. Maybe it's been showing up as a restlessness or a sudden return of thoughts you'd managed to quiet, or a feeling that something is changing in the atmosphere around this situation without being able to point to a specific cause. That feeling is accurate. The tide is already responding. The wave is already moving. Let me land this somewhere that feels true rather than somewhere that feels tidy, because this reading is asking for truth rather than tidiness. What's coming requires courage from both of you. From them, the courage to arrive without guarantees, to say what's true without knowing how it will be received, to make themselves fully visible and vulnerable to someone they've already given reason not to trust them, and to do it anyway, because the alternative is a life lived in the aftermath of a choice they know they should not have made. From you, a different kind of courage. The courage of receiving something you wanted and not immediately managing it, of letting yourself feel the full size of what's being offered before you begin the process of deciding what to do with it, of not shrinking the moment into something more manageable before you've let it be what it is. This is a moment that deserves to be felt before it's handled. You are standing at the edge of something that has been developing for longer than either of you fully knows, that has been pulling toward this point through the combined weight of everything that happened and everything that was missing afterward. The convergence is real. The awakening is real. The love underneath all of it, present from the beginning, surviving the distance, surviving the choices that were made in its neglect, is real. Let it be real. Before the thinking, before the deciding, before the careful, precise, very Virgo process of determining what is wise. Just for a moment, let it be as large and as true as it actually is. That moment is coming soon, and you are more ready for it than you know. I want to hear something specific in the comments. Not whether this reading resonated. Generally tell me about the feeling of the tide I described. That sense that something is already shifting in the atmosphere around a specific person or situation before anything visible has changed. Have you felt that recently? A restlessness that doesn't have an obvious source. A sudden return of something you thought you'd successfully quieted. If that's been happening for you, tell me. And if you know exactly who this reading is about, who came to mind in the very first seconds, I want to know that too. I read everything, every single one.